Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, we are returning to some old friends as we go back to the old stabby Batman himself, Dexter Morgan, in Dexter Resurrection, and we revisit the second volume of Kieran Gillen and Caspar Wingard's nuclear superhero comic, The Power Fantasy. But before all of that, Alistair, what else have you consumed in the last fortnight?
So, I mentioned this in the last episode, and now I'm going to discuss it in detail. I've been watching the brand new season of King of the Hill. So this is on Disney+, and yeah, it's about 16, 17 years since the last season. So it's been on hiatus for quite a while. Yeah, and Disney have brought it back with a brand new 10-episode season, and they've moved things on. The time that's passed in reality is also reflected in the show. So yeah, they've moved things on. Bobby is now an adult, and he runs a restaurant in Ireland. The Hills have retired, and yeah, and like kind of wider sort of society has moved on as well. They've got an interesting setup for the plot, which is that Hank and Peggy have just returned to Ireland after many years working in Saudi Arabia, where Hank was assistant manager for propane and propane accessories for Saudi Amco. And they just come back to Ireland and found, yeah, it's a changed place with like modern newfangled things like faux restaurants and things like that. So yeah, so they have moved this show with the times, but the main thing I say about it is that this humour is very much in line with the original King of the Hill. There's still got that like warmth, that kind of, sense of community, sense of these like likeable characters who are eccentric, but everyone's kind of like decent, like at the bottom of it. And they've managed to kind of weave in the modern stuff really well, because the nature of Hank as a character is that he's like a sort of a man's man, but he is just like excessively awkward and like easily embarrassed by things he doesn't quite understand. They've just kind of used this to embrace like the modern world, like such as, he doesn't understand like modern craft beer and just finds it sort of like strange and confusing, and would just rather prefer his good old-fashioned Alamo beer served cold from the fridge. And considering this is a show set in small town Texas, very conservative parts of America, they're not leaning into basically like Hank being like a culture warrior or anti-woke or anything like that, or just getting really kind of angry and like wound up at the modern world. It's obviously a lot of like, especially like men from conservative backgrounds in their 60s, there's this lot of anger about society leaving them behind, and Hank's not like an angry person. He's just a bit bemused and like made slightly uncomfortable, but usually comes around to like accepting and appreciating something. So that's the kind of the essence of what you want from King of the Hill, and they managed to make it work in the sort of the year 2025.
Yeah, I've heard people talking a bit about this, and it seems to have broadly gone down well. People seem to agree that this is, one of the pleasant revivals that doesn't just seem like it's just ruining the original or just raking its corpse up for money. So I guess that's nice for you King of the Hill fans. I have heard it's good, but I've never seen it, so I haven't watched this because I haven't had time to watch the 14, 15 previous seasons?
So this is season 14, so there's 13 previous seasons. And obviously it was on like Fox, so they're like, 22 episode seasons and things like that. They're obviously like 20-minute sitcoms, but yeah, there's a lot of old King of the Hill material to dig through.
Well, I'll start catching up now and see you in 2029.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So add that one to the rewatch list at some point. But yeah, I think this has been well received partly because updating it and moving it forwards does make it seem sort of like fresh and original. It's not just kind of like you're not just getting more of the same, but also they've kept like a lot of the dynamics the same, things like that. Like the relationship between the characters hasn't like changed a lot. There's a few generally moving bits about how Bill became sort of unmoored and kind of depressed when Hank went away, because his sort of connection to his friend was like the one thing holding Bill together, which is kind of funny but also kind of sad as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm a huge King of the Hill fan, so I'm sort of very much the market for this, but I think they have done a really good job, mainly because it is just really funny. Like there is like a really good density of humor, and just they come up with some really, really like funny, like original premises. Like there's a great one when it's revealed that whilst in Saudi Arabia, Hank got really into soccer and actually learned to like appreciate it, but also like he's now really embarrassed by this, that he actually prefers soccer to like American football, so he has to like hide it from everyone, and it's his like dirty secret, and then he ends up becoming like a ref for like a little league, but then again has to hide that, and it's just a really funny like conceit for an episode. It's like Hank's dirty secret is that he likes soccer. So yeah, I mean, there are some very, very funny episodes.
Yeah, it's Mike Judge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or at least he's involved somehow.
Yeah, he's the creator and sort of main writer and things like that. Yeah, and yeah, obviously we love Silicon Valley, Office Space, again, is a great film, a film that I really enjoy, one of my favourites. Idiocracy is very funny.
Yeah, I think Silicon Valley is the main thing I've seen of his, but I did really, really enjoy it. I did have consuming more of his work on my list of things to do, and King of the Hill may well qualify, so maybe one day.
Yeah. Definitely watch Office Space at some point. Again, it might come round on a recommendation. But yeah, King of the Hill's there. I mean, King of the Hill, similar to Silicon Valley, he's good at creating these sort of eccentric, complex characters and kind of having like a sort of small group of them that have this sort of different interactions and different like dynamics and balances of power. Each one's got something like slightly odd or like unusual about them, and then kind of finding the humour in this sort of like limited set of characters. I mean, both kind of, there's not many when like they bring in external characters to shake things up. That's a very King of the Hill thing and a very Silicon Valley thing. It's just really focusing on the different ways you can put this like small group of characters together to create like new humorous situations.
Yeah, although in Silicon Valley, most of the main characters were kind of awful. Like, he still, quite cleverly managed to get some level of depth out of them, but they ultimately were kind of awful people. Whereas it sounds like it's a bit more sympathetic in King of the Hill.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very sympathetic portrait of, small town conservative Texas. And the point of King of the Hill is just like this warmth that comes through the whole thing, and like everyone's like nice kind of at the bottom of it, and they always get on well, and it usually ends on like a really like positive note. Like, again, the last beat of a King of the Hill episode is rarely a joke. It's usually a moment of like togetherness and love, which always leaves you this like nice warm thing. Classic Simpsons does that as well, actually. So, yeah, resist the urge to go for one final joke right in the end. It'd leave you with like this nice warm content feeling, which is a really like confident and great way to write.
I mean, that's a very standard among a lot of the big successful American sitcoms, I guess. I mean, The Office US does that as well. It often goes for the sort of human emotion at the end of the episode rather than just a punchline, or it has the sort of tag over the credits that lets you have a quick punchline after they've done the emotional moment.
Yeah. And that's what Seinfeld was subverting with their rules, like no hugs, no one ever learns anything. Again, they're trying to like fly in the face of traditional sitcom format with the nice ending.
Well, British sitcoms are less like that, but anyway, we're, I think, going a bit far away from King of the Hill at this point. But yeah, British sitcoms are a bit more prone to just ending on a joke.
Yeah, ending on a joke or ending on a sort of a darker moment or something like that. Yeah. Usually like a moment of dark humour. You are right, there is like a big difference between the two. This new season, there's like, I basically worked out that kind of, the season breaks down into like, there's like 3 types of episodes. And it's quite interesting, shows like sort of the range of like things they're covering. Or one type of episode is like a character gets involved in like something modern. So for example, there's one when Hank joins a sort of handyman app, a sort of Uber for handyman, but then consistently gets bad ratings and then really gets upset by this. So that's very much like finding humour in something modern. The second type of episode is basically exploring who is Hank and Peggy now that they're retired and not working full time, which is again an interesting sort of character arc and definitely something new they're doing with their characters. Again, there's a lot of episodes of them just sort of like basically getting involved in silly things just because they need to get out of the house because they feel no purpose in life now they don't work. And then the third type of episode is basically a sort of thing that could have happened in classic King of the Hill. It's like not really related to like moving the characters on or or modern technology. For example, there's an amazing episode when Bobby gets conned into buying a horse. Right. Which obviously is just unsuited for the modern world. And he in this version, like Bobby, now that he's grown up, he lives with Joseph, who's grown up, and Joseph really takes to the horse. And it's just kind of spirals from there. But like there's nothing about sort of modern society there. That could that's a sort of plot line that could have happened at any moment, but it is a sort of like classic King of the Hill moment. Bobby buying a horse is very funny. I think it's one of the funniest bits of the season. So yeah, those are the kind of 3 approaches they have, and they kind of balance each other well. So it's not like there's a good balance of like jokes about modern things, such as Bobby gets accused of cultural appropriation at one point, or jokes again that could have happened at any point, such as there's one about the Khan's 30th wedding anniversary. There's one about Bill discovering he has a secret life with a different group of friends. Things like that aren't time or like context dependent, I suppose, or modern context dependent, I should say.
Yeah, no, sounds like they found a good balance of moving it on while still appealing to the old fans. Farm animals just being fundamentally funny in themselves is definitely on the timeless humour list. I personally find horses and goats bottomlessly hilarious.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, especially like farm animals in the context when they shouldn't appear.
Yeah. Incongruous farm animals. Yeah, that's the key to humour.
There's quite a lot of humour in this episode, just made of the fact that like Bobby's got like a horse in like the car park from his building and things like that. It's just like eating people's takeaways as they walk past and things like that. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, but I can really recommend this as a King of the Hill fan. I've really enjoyed this. Yeah, it's generally, we'll see what the rest of the year has in store for us. But yeah, I think there's a good chance this ending up on in the final rundown of things at the end of the year. But let's just see what the rest of the year has. But yeah, I've been engaging in revisiting the new version of a classic. Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I read a book, another actual book. I'm doing my read 20 books in a year target this year, and it's really influenced my podcast content. Because yes, the book I've read most recently, well, the book I finished most recently is Nuclear War, A Scenario by Annie Jacobsen. This is I have a sort of fiction and non-fiction strands to my reading, and I've put this in non-fiction, even though it is in fact a fictional story, just with a lot of research backing it up. It's basically a scenario, as per the title, in which the world goes to nuclear war, and she walks us through in extreme detail exactly what would happen in that case, exactly what it would look like from a sort of internal processes standpoint for actual nuclear war to break out, and what that would realistically mean for, the world. And spoilers, it's quite bleak. It's not good news for the world. The world, it turns out, does not do well in the event of nuclear war. And yeah, it's one of those books which it's hard to look away from in a very train wreck sort of way. It is obviously not cheerful, and obviously a huge amount of research has gone into it, and it's very interesting. But ultimately, yes, it's a massive bummer.
Yeah, that does sound like a depressing read. I guess a good accompany to Threads, the horrible British series about exactly how miserable it would be to live through nuclear war and then the fallout. In fact, I think the bit when crops fail and mass starvation sets in and there's a high level of background radiation in some ways seems worse than the initial blast itself.
Yeah, I don't think Annie Jacobsen's as interested in that. I guess because it's harder to, extrapolate based on political processes. She's a lot more what does it actually mean to start a nuclear war? How would the president go about doing this? How would this happen in other countries? What realistically would then happen? When we get to the part which is, borderline speculative fiction, what society would look like in the aftermath, I think she's a bit less keen to speculate at length. The bit about the post-impact world is much shorter.
Yeah, I guess she's writing about the aspects that she knows most about, and we have the most information about. That does sound absolutely fascinating, though. I mean, nuclear weapons and nuclear war, as well as being something that appears in fiction a lot as a fear, is something that I find sort of weirdly darkly alluring. I read recently your book, it's called something 1983, The World on the Brink, about the time we came second closest to nuclear war, and it is just terrifying how easily misunderstandings or rising conflicts could spill over into all-out Armageddon. Basically, it is kind of really, really scary, how easy it would be to destroy the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things that isn't actually extrapolated at length in this book is it's not really described at length the events that got us to this point. It basically feels like one day the leaders of North Korea woke up and decided, fuck it, it's time to launch nuclear weapons at North America and then just go and hide in our bunker. And that's basically what destroys the world within about an hour and a half. Spoilers for this book, which obviously ends that way.
Oof, dark.
And yeah, then there's a series of misunderstandings. Russia gets involved. There are a few moments where you think, okay, you're not above invoking a bit of the old thriller pacing, are you? You're, bringing in a bit of sort of rising action to move this along and make it exciting, rather than just a long book about people pressing buttons and making administrative decisions. But still, it still seems on the right side of plausible, I think.
Well, that's the skill, I guess, of being an engaging writer. The approach sounds really interesting as well. So is it written kind of in prose, but informed by, I guess, research and real things? Or is the writing style more in line with non-fiction, I suppose?
It sort of dips in and out of it. There's a lot of narrative, but also a lot of cutting back to say, according to this person who worked in the Pentagon, or according to this person who was in this meeting on this date, this is what would then happen. There's not really an attempt to create an illusion. She's very much, okay, we all know what we're doing here. I'm telling this story, but I'm basing it on these sources, so I'm just going to come in and say, here's what this person said, or here's my source from this. It's a balancing act, but it works.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a book I read, I think you read as well, called Red Plenty, which described itself as a non-fiction novel, in that, it's written in a prose style, but based on, historic research in this case about Russia in the 1950s. So it seems like a sort of similar approach, again, borrowing from both fiction and non-fiction to tell a true story, or a sort of story rooted in our world, but using the tools of the fiction writer playbook.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I don't know, I described it as narrative non-fiction, but I'm not sure that's entirely true, because that would be, writing a novelistic story about something that actually happened. Whereas here we're writing a sort of semi-novelistic story about something that might happen in the future. So, whatever. Hypothetical, narrative, semi-fiction, or whatever the genre is here.
Interesting, yeah.
I think this was quite a big deal book last year. I finally got to reading it. It's pretty good. As you say, there seems to be a bit of a fascination in the zeitgeist with this kind of massive worldwide destruction for some reason I couldn't possibly think about. Between, the success of books like this and obviously, the success of comics like the Power Fantasy, which are also toying with annihilation.
Yeah, or again, Fantastic Four has a sort of world annihilation plot line to it as well. And, I do feel that, there was definitely a time when we were more focused on like, I don't know, post 9/11, I guess the world was more focused on terrorism and rogue states and things like that. And now we're back to all-out nuclear war being one of our bigger fears. I guess, I suppose the kind of the post 9/11 world did give us things like the film of The Sum of All Fears about, what would happen if like a small group of rogue actors acquired a nuclear weapon from somewhere and decided to set it off. But I guess now we're not so much worried about, again, a small group of rogue actors as we're concerned about states with missiles and vast arsenals.
Yeah. If you want to hear about vast arsenals, there's also lots of chat about exactly how one launches a nuclear weapon. Turns out nuclear submarines are pretty terrifying, as a lot of listeners probably already knew, but it was good to have it explained to me at punishing length in this book.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, again, it does sound very much my sort of thing, like really a fascinating story and probably quite terrifying. I mean, I think people should read this sort of thing and be aware of this is a real threat to an existential threat to all life on Earth and the human race. And, we need to be aware of how easily it could all go wrong so that we understand the destructive power at our hands and we can maybe come up with political solutions, such as even maybe reducing the number of weapons, putting more controls on them, making sure that the systems for launching them are robust and can't be interfered with, or don't run on ancient computer systems, still use floppy disks and things like that could easily malfunction. So yeah, I think a level of awareness of how precarious the world balances on a knife edge is probably a good thing for most people.
Yeah, there's at the end, her sort of final thesis, spoilers I guess, for the thesis of a non-fiction book, if that's something you count as spoilers, is very much, just to be clear, this is not necessarily a book about how we're all doomed and there's no point, or people are fundamentally evil. The point of this book is nuclear weapons are fundamentally awful. It is arguably wrong to even possess or have nuclear weapons. That is what she says at the end, just to make sure no one misses the point.
No one misses the point. So yeah, maybe now that you're aware of how easily we could destroy the world, maybe we could do something to make this less likely to happen.
Yeah, as I say, it's not a calming or chill book, but it's a very interesting one, and it does sadly feel very of the time.
Next up, this episode, we will be discussing Dexter Resurrection, which picks up the story of Dexter directly after the end of Dexter New Blood, when he was shot by his son and his old friend Angel discovered that Dexter is a serial killer. This new show relocates Dexter to New York to track down his son, who is being investigated for a murder he committed to save an innocent woman. At the same time, a serial killer called the Dark Passenger is on the loose, and a billionaire is putting together a dinner club for serial killers. We've seen this complete first season on Paramount+. Nick, what did you think of it?
As I often seem to say recently when we review a new Dexter project, yeah, this was surprisingly alright. Obviously, we're increasingly into what I guess you could think of as creatively bankrupt territory now. New Blood was very much a good ending for this. I re-listened to our review of New Blood, and we did say several times, yeah, it's really good that they're taking the creative integrity route of actually giving it a proper ending and really finishing it. And yeah, more fool us, I guess. We're back. The ending of New Blood has been basically undone, or at least heavily clawed back. But, if we just accept that, yes, they are making these still, and he's basically an unkillable movie monster now, as someone literally says in dialogue during the show. This is one of his more entertaining recent outings, yes. It's got a bit more of a sense of, fast-paced, slightly silly fun than a lot of the classic seasons. I think we're moving on a bit from the fact that he's genuinely disturbing, and a bit more on the fact that it's just fun to watch Dexter stab up the baddies. Yeah, Michael C. Hall is still incredibly charismatic. They've gone back to the classic Dexter trope of bringing in known actors to play the guest serial killers. In fact, they've gone really hard on that. They've got this whole dinner club for serial killers, and a lot of them are played by people you know from other things. So yeah, it's a lot of fun to watch. It's very much more Dexter, but it's more entertaining Dexter with a lot of momentum and humour. Some of the things that made the old show get a bit silly are definitely still in there, but I think they're focusing a bit more on different things in this, and it makes it still quite watchable. Who knows how long they can wring out of it, but this season was fun.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed this. Yeah, I did find it very entertaining. It's got, that classic Dexter charm to it, which is, fast-paced thriller, sort of lots of awful people for Dexter to off, and a sort of mystery that, unravels across the 10 episodes. Yeah, again, I enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed Dexter New Blood. Seemed to work along similar lines. Moving it to New York has created, a whole new environment for Dexter. Obviously, the opportunity to bring in, a lot of new characters, a lot of new situations, slightly getting away from the fact that, how many people has he killed in Miami in some, quite overt ways, and that no one's really noticed that Dexter's kind of at the center of all this stuff. As you say, it's part of the sort of silliness of the show that they're brushing through at this point. But I did really like the plot line with the dinner club for serial killers, phenomenal cast. Peter Dinklage playing the billionaire behind it, Uma Thurman as his sort of enforcer and bodyguard, Kristen Ritter turning up as a serial killer, Lady Vengeance. There's a whole other series of interesting and creative serial killers, including Rapunzel Muzzle, who kills women and cuts off their ponytails, a guy called the Tattoo Collector, Gemini Killer.
Played again by Neil Patrick Harris and David Dasmalchian. They're very much going in on guest stars here.
Yeah. They spent quite a bit of money on this to get like well-known faces in. Yeah, and it's kind of like the middle bit of the series is kind of really basically structured around each episode. Dexter offs, one member of the serial killer club. So yeah, it's kind of going back also a bit to some of the older Dexter charm of like murder of the week. Like each week Dexter finds a killer, stalks them, has to like trap them and then kill them. And then with the sort of slowly unfolding plot in the background of there's like an uber villain that he catches at the end of the season. So yeah, again, like if you like your old school Dexter, this is a good another slice of Dexter.
Yeah, I think, as you say, the move to New York has definitely given it a bit of a shot in the arm. I think the fact that it was always the same supporting characters, the same location, the same sets, the same everything. That was definitely one of the reasons why it felt like they'd run into a bit of a creative cul-de-sac by the end of season 8 of Dexter. If they've learnt one lesson, hopefully, it's for mixing it up maybe not every season, but certainly every few seasons. Like, I'll be disappointed if we get to season 4 or 5 of Dexter Resurrection. If we do, who knows? I know shows don't seem to run that long nowadays. But yeah, if we do get to like multiple seasons of this and he's still hanging around New York in like 3 or 4 seasons, I do suspect that might be when things start to get a bit stale. But for now, yeah, it feels new, it feels interesting, just because a lot of the fun in this is the practicalities of his killing and exactly how he stalks people and how he gets them on his table. Yeah, putting him in a new environment which meaningfully changes how he has to go about that is one of the big ways of refreshing it. Plus, again, switching up the supporting characters so that you don't have the same people just not noticing he's obviously killing people and looking increasingly stupid with every passing season, especially when they're meant to be some kind of detective.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 24, more life or new life into it in some of the later seasons by, again, getting away from LA and, taking Jack Bauer to new locations, including, New York being, one of the early ones. I guess there's only a limited number of times you can blow up, large bits of LA. But this, again, it's something new, it's something, fresh. They're moving it along, which is good, and coming up with these, new characters, which are good as well. And, they've dispensed with the classic Dexter opening credits, and I quite like the new opening credits that includes a sort of Mission Impossible style preview of what's to come, but out of order and in sort of flashes and glimpses, so it's kind of hard to work out what's happening, but it does get you excited of ooh, what's Dexter going to be up to this time? Yeah,
I think they're playing it a bit differently with the supporting characters in that Dexter isn't really super close to or involved with any of them except Harrison. I think I get the feeling that, I don't know, apart from Harrison, I think a lot of the supporting cast here are quite disposable. Like this character Blessing, who is this new bloke whose basement he now lives in, is, if he disappeared between seasons, I don't think I would mind that much. Maybe they're going somewhere with it, who knows. It doesn't feel like it's a character we're going to get attached to and spend years and years and years with.
Yeah.
And the same's true of basically every other character introduced in this. The ones who don't die anyway.
Yeah. I get the feeling that possibly, maybe this sort of police detective might be a recurring sort of, nemesis for Dexter. I guess you've got to have the one person who thinks Dexter's sus on some level. So Dokes in, the old show, and then kind of Quinn later on and things like that. So, it's some of the Dexter elements they're picking up. But this one has the whole, especially in the sort of first bit of the season, the rideshare serial killer, the dark passenger. So there's other rideshare characters. I mean, they might not keep that aspect. I mean, yeah, like I say, it'd be fine if they switched up the core group of characters around Dexter in between seasons. I suppose keeping him as a rideshare driver does make it easier for him to, stalk the streets and follow people and, research his kills, I suppose, as he's not a forensics analyst in this season, which, again, is how he got access to the evidence to plan his kills in the old show. So I guess that is a way they can keep him prowling the streets of New York. Also, there's a sort of pleasing analogy to Taxi Driver, again, of this unhinged psycho driving around New York, exploring its underbelly in the modern version of a taxi. So I kind of like the I don't know if that's a deliberate nod or not, but I certainly appreciated it.
Yeah, again, part of me wouldn't mind if they mixed up his job and his surroundings every year just to keep things fresh, but I don't know. It's hard to say what they'll do. The last couple of seasons, they've done a decent job of it, but maybe they'll want to settle down a bit. I don't really know.
I mean, certainly the thing about this season is that by the end, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but not like a massive spoiler. But yeah, if you're super spoiler averse, I guess switch off now. We'll go to the Power Fantasy bit. But yeah, by the very end of the season, they've clearly set up a new status quo, or returned Dexter to his usual status quo just in New York. He even gets his little box of blood vials back and things like that. And the ending is very very much almost like him pretty much like turning to camera and saying like, I'm back, I'm where you want me, doing what you want me to do. So it feels like they're definitely setting this up to be a thing that runs. This isn't a victory lap for Dexter as New Blood certainly was. This is more of a kind of, right, this is the beginning of a new chapter that also will be in the vein of what you've seen before.
New Blood, I think, was very much, they know it's going to end, and they've got him sort of reflecting on his life a bit as he sort of slouches towards this moment where he's telling his son to kill him. And by all accounts, based on, the few interviews I've read with the showrunner, that was because they genuinely thought they were killing him for good. Whereas here, they've decided they're going to bring him back as an ongoing concern. Therefore, he can't be sitting around contemplating, his sins and what it's all for and whether he deserves to live. It has to be moving forward with enthusiasm. It has to be, him embracing what he is. Again, it sort of makes him into this eternal, immortal monster. This sort of, again, like movie character. Yeah, horror movie franchise creature, I guess. But at this point, 10 seasons in, maybe that's what it takes to keep him going. If you're going to pretend this is a plausible serial killer drama, it's just gotten too silly and convoluted at this stage, I think.
Yeah, no, that's very much the case. I mean, it's probably the fate of many shows that run for this length of time with one basically main character and a similar, like, premise and things like that. I mean, like, I mentioned it before, but, like, 24 kind of became the same. Like, in the first season, Jack Bauer is basically a detective show, like a cop show. He's a cop basically, but like investigates terrorism rather than murders or whatever, and he has to solve like a conspiracy, and stop an assassination. And by like season 5 or whatever, he's just sort of like unstoppable terrorist killing murder machine that just sort of rampages through increasingly bizarre and convoluted and implausible terrorism plots. And yeah, he sort of became pretty much immortal. He like dies at one point and comes back. I think he gets sent to China and locked in a room and tortured for a year, and then seems to come back even more cold and distant. So yeah, Jack Bauer stopped being a policeman and ended up basically being a kind of terrorist killing Terminator at one point. Even like Friends, after 10 seasons, a lot of the characters sort of became a bit of a catchphrase, or like they stopped being people. They kind of just stopped being a sort of extreme pattern of behavior associated with various archetypes, to the point when they clearly probably all needed to be institutionalized to readjust them to society. So I think this is just the fate of like long running shows that don't go on like big arcs. They don't have like a planned arc. Like Breaking Bad has an arc, like we've got the character in this point and we're going to take him to this point. I mean, they pitched it as Mr. Chips to Scarface. So Dexter doesn't have an arc, neither did 24, so the character's just become more himself by this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, Dexter's reached this point where rather than being a guy who, goes to work every day and has friends and co-workers or whatever, he's basically this guy who lives in a basement and prowls around the street in a taxi. I guess if you could trace the arc to him just accepting that he's just this sort of loose monster now, and he doesn't really get to pretend to be a real person. A lot of the time in Dexter, I think, sort of peaking in the series with Trinity Killer, they tried to make the fundamental dilemma of it: can I have it all? Can I be a regular person and a serial killer? And I think in this show at this point we've accepted that the answer is no, I'm not a regular person, I'm some sort of vengeance wraith.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have my sort of token human relationship with my son, but that's kind of as far as it goes a lot of the time.
I do like the relationship with Harrison. I thought that worked well, but yeah, it's crucial. It's got to the point when like Harrison knows what Dexter is and what he does, and has even like participated in like several kills. So you could say they don't have like a sort of normal, relationship. It's not like, again, early Dexter, when they, as you say, they're exploring this stuff when it's more like Dexter has a life with like kids and a wife and a family, and then like a life as a serial killer, and how do they overlap? He has one life as a serial killer. He has a son in that life. This is part of it, but he doesn't have a normal life outside being a serial killer. I mean, like, yeah, there is no point where Dexter stops and the Dark Passenger begins. They're just like the same people at this point. But I did like the plot line with Harrison, and there was quite a lot of tension about this police closing in on him. The various cat and mouse police stuff is pretty good. There's a lot of tension there, considering it is definitely the beta plot next to Dexter and the Serial Killer Club. It didn't feel like a sort of an add-on. There was some general like emotion there. I felt that it kind of got left unresolved a bit, or it was resolved very quickly, and I kind of missed the kind of resolution moment. But the plot line of Harrison murdering someone and getting away from it was, very much present early on, and then just seemed to fade.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I can see, Dexter got him out of it. I guess I won't spoil exactly how, since we're still operating under the delusion of non-spoiler. And then the only person who didn't buy it was Batista, and no one believed Batista, so I guess for now that's resolved, although it's the sort of thing you could very quickly and easily unpick in a future season.
Yeah, I assumed they were going to come back to that like, there would be some form of resolution beyond the fact that like people just accept the given version of the story. Again, dancing around spoilers, but it's my only real criticism of the show is that I kind of felt that was something that was put out there and kind of resolved a bit too neatly. Again, maybe they're going to come back to the next season, but I guess it was kind of sacrificed to make space for the big plot at the end with the serial killer club, which was good and like had a really like tense ending to the show. But I did like the kind of Harrison plot line. Sometimes, again, there are some seasons of Dexter when the whole Dexter's personal relationship side is like can get a little like tedious, or just see as like an afterthought next to whatever murders they're doing this season. But this one it worked, which again made it feel a bit more like kind of the good old seasons of Dexter from like the early run.
Well, yeah, but I've said before, I think, or possibly I've written before, we may be getting back to my old written reviews of Dexter, but the problem with a lot of the later seasons of this show is they seem to devote large amounts of screen time to the individual subplots involving his supporting cast of random cops, and they just weren't that interesting, and they just went on forever, and you just end up sitting there thinking, why is Dexter not on screen? Bring back Dexter. Every scene with no Dexter is bullshit. And in this version of the show, at least so far, they are very much keeping those scenes to a tight minimum. I think Jack Alcott as Harrison gets a decent few to keep his subplot going, and there's a few with cops on cases, but that's about it. They're kept fairly tight, and a lot of the time it's just the Dexter show about Dexter, which is the form in which it works best, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And again, similar to 24, like all the other random CTU people and like Jack's family just seem to like just kind of fade out of it at one point, and they just focused on this one character that, the audience has responded really well to and people just want more of. I mean, I suppose this show is actually like called Dexter, and it's clearly, and it's always been like about him. They've mined the rest of Dexter's life for enough story at this point, and kind of moving it forwards is working for them. And like I say, this was entertaining, this was good. I don't know if it's just because they switched up the environs and that kind of breathed new life into it, or that there's been a pause for a bit, so they've had some proper time to work on it. Maybe there are bad seasons of Dexter, so maybe the next one will slide back into some of the annoying older habits. But at the same time, this was actually like really entertaining, and I kind of enjoyed watching it. I also mainly watched it in like kind of the last week and a bit, so going through it at like an episode a day, there is a real like building of tension and like just like rising tension in a good pace. So actually, it worked well as something that was like consumed quite quickly. It's very entertaining and exciting that in that way.
Well, yeah, like a lot of the good old seasons of Dexter, the way he's stalking his main prey is by constructing this elaborate lie about who he is in order to get closer to them. And the further it goes, the more these lies sort of build on top of each other, and the more it becomes tenser and tenser about whether he'll get away with it. And this show does do a good rendition of that, especially because, we've seen them in the past show that go disastrously wrong. So there is at least some sense that could happen. Dexter at least does usually have some awareness that, the only non-disposable character is Dexter, and other people can die. And indeed, there is a decent amount of bloodshed in this new season to remind us that everyone except for Dexter is killable.
Yeah, actually, that's another thing I did really like about it. Yeah, that, anyone could die. And yeah, there are some like characters that certainly in other shows or even previous seasons of Dexter would be safe. They get dispatched. Yeah, with some generally like strong moments of drama. And so that, again, dancing around some specific spoilers, but I thought, that kind of sense of like anyone could get killed off. This is a show about murderers, and a lot of people, including the non-murderer cast, can get murderized. And it happens, and it's good. So that's probably largely impenetrable to people who haven't seen Dexter, but there you have it.
I think anyone can understand the appeal of murder.
Yeah, exactly, at this point, especially as British people, like a good murder.
This is an American show, to be fair.
Yeah, but it seems to be a uniquely, it seems to be a very British thing, from our Midsummer's Murders to our Richard Osmans. It's just, this is just brought with like a sense of American flair and ultra-violence at times. I mean, and some of the bits are pretty like gruesome when like, knives going in and throats being grossled and, if that's the right verb, and other serial killers doing like very unpleasant things involving skinning or, again, like, slicing throats. So, if you're in Dexter for the blood, there's bloodshed here. This is not the sort of show where someone gets Agatha Christie style like bonked on the head a bit and then falls over. This is like, there's blood, there's internal organs.
Hooray.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing the second volume of The Power Fantasy by Kieran Gillen and Caspar Wingard. This comic follows the story of the 6 superpowers, individuals who each possess the destructive power equivalent to the entire US nuclear arsenal. In this second story arc, alliances are forming between the group and betrayals are being planned, while the Pyramid teams up with the US government and Heavy reveals that he has a son who may also be a superpower. We read the first 11 issues of this comic. Nick, what do you think of the story so far?
Yeah, I thought this was still good. I think we're cracking on with the sort of central mysteries hinted at in the first volume almost sooner than I thought, to be honest. I think after spending a lot of time in the first volume doing a bit more sort of talky stuff about, the risks involved and the possibilities and the dark reality of what would happen if they ever came into conflict, we're very much seeing both. I think in this volume there's sort of a lengthy flashback sequence in the middle and then a sort of another big blow up at the end. And in both those cases we're sort of seeing a bit more of the reality of what happens when the superpowers go at it, and also maybe we're moving a bit more towards what I would think of as superhero comic territory in some cases. And in fact also, weirdly, not even sort of energy zappy superheroes, but sometimes like magic superheroes as well. There's a bit of what I guess you could broadly call the Doctor Strange side of the Marvel Universe, or the sort of Swamp Thing, John Constantine side of the DC Universe, moving into that area. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought Kieran Gillen did a good job of getting that stuff in and playing some of his superhero comic cards while still holding on to the sort of the characterization and the talk about, mass annihilation, minimal damages, acceptable loss, what it's okay to tolerate, what you can get away with, that sort of thing. Yeah, no, I thought this is good. I thought this escalated the first volume nicely.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was brilliant. Every kind of page is really, really exciting. It's a really rich world that's been built up in only 11 issues. It feels like we've had a lot more story. And this is a world that includes, as you said, heaven and hell are parts of it, but also other things as well. There's this cult that Heavy's got. There's a history of the world, a sort of alternate history that this comic's exploring. There's the pyramid, this group that combines tech and magic. There's a lot of moving elements to it. And there is, again, it feels like we've received a lot more or spent a lot more time in this world and with these characters. And I think it's because of Kieran Gillen's really precise writing and things like that, and very efficient storytelling. It's really focused on basically relationships and conflicts between primarily the 6 main characters and a few supporting casts, but primarily these 6 main characters and the dynamics between them and their shared history. And that focus on that, I feel, really brings out this sense of more accurately, it allows him to kind of drip in and feed in all this other background stuff and this wider world. It can kind of be hinted at or gradually introduced or kind of obliquely pointed to in a way that makes the world feel bigger and more complicated, or reveals the complexities of the world that aren't explicitly stated in the text, but also keeping it exciting and entertaining, as a literal page turner. So podcast favorite, Kieran Gillen does it again.
Yeah, you said efficiency of writing. That's probably the best term, to be honest. There's very good work here, sort of passing a lot of world building in a couple of lines here and there, or a couple of implications, and it both works in the current story and sort of gins you up for the future. A lot of what happens in this volume is him expanding on things that were hinted at in volume 1, and there's a lot of stuff hinted at here which could well be expanded on in volume 3. He's very much showing us the sort of surface of this world without just banging on exposition, and giving himself a lot of stuff to build on in the future, whilst still giving us, a present day narrative, so that there's something happening other than just him telling us about all his world building. Yeah, no, again, yes, the writing here is very precise. It's very good.
Yeah, I mean, some of my favourite writers, again, I describe as very efficient writers, such as Hayam Namureri. I think I pronounced that. It's Finnish. Sorry to any Finnish listeners. We may have, who knows at this point. But yeah, he's very good at again, gesturing towards a whole world or a whole backstory between characters, in sort of as few words as possible. And we see that here. I mean, and there's a really interesting range of characters that each of the superpowers has their kind of distinct personality and history and things like that. You kind of again get a real sense of who they are. I really like the pyramid. I think that's really interesting. There's a good twist in this. I don't know if we're going to go full spoilers. No. But I thought that was a really good twist that I liked a lot, and it's a very interesting character. And also I thought the key moments when that twist was first revealed, and then they do the end of issue or end of episode big reveal, then the next one you get a kind of, all right, so how did this actually come about? And that's just a really good bit of really engaging storytelling, again obliquely discussing it so that to preserve you, should you wish to read this, which I highly recommend, the story and it's not spoiled. But I did really like that bit, especially as I find the kind of pyramid really fascinating. I guess they're kind of the sort of cyberpunk techie side of the superpowers, as opposed to there's the one that's a literal angel and a literal demon, etc.
Yeah, and the one that's kind of Professor Xavier, and the one that's this kind of hippie. And yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. And yeah, I liked, obviously that twist is in some ways the centerpiece of this volume, though there is another big set piece at the end as well. And yeah, it's really, really well pulled off. Again, with Kieran Gillen sort of delicately drip feeding us the information we need to get it beforehand. And yeah, it just works. And it's impressive to make that sort of identity twist work, I guess, with characters who we've only known for, like, at that point, 9 issues. I mean, I read this twice. Yeah, I read the first volume to remind myself what was going on. Then I read the second volume. And then I read the second volume again, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, especially because the twists he pulls here and the moves he does are, if anything, enriched by going back and rereading the story and seeing how they fit in. So yeah, no, again, it's clever stuff.
And also, there's a real philosophical side to this comic, which I really liked. Like, again, especially one of the characters who's, I don't know, one of the ones who, well, this was they all hold the fate of the world in their hands, but so I guess one of them who's like more aware of their power has, a very sort of utilitarian philosophical approach. And there is a kind of, good exploration of philosophy in this comic, which again, as a bit of a philosophy nerd, I did really like. But also, I can imagine most people saying like, and there's characters and they discuss philosophy, and most people are going, oh god, that sounds interminable. But actually, it is made like exciting. I guess it's partly made exciting because these are people who, in some cases with a thought could annihilate the human race. Again, not too dissimilar to what, we were talking about at the top of the episode with the nuclear war scenario. Again, some people do have it in their hands to obliterate the whole human race. And what is the sort of morality process that goes on in such a mind, and like how that affects your thinking, and like how you would make these decisions to be like what's right and what's wrong when you could like hold such power in your hands. And like that's a really interesting side of the storytelling. But again, as I must stress, it's like not done in a kind of dull, pretentious way.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, the interesting part of that calculus is because he's got like 6 characters, he could have a lot of different attitudes to that. Like there's a character in this who would probably kill billions of people because they've decided it was, the morally right thing to do based on some long contemplation. There's another one who might just do it almost by accident because they were in a bad mood. And there's another one who might do it because they feel bad about it, but they've decided it's what's best for the rest of you. It's that sort of thing. It's all these attitudes coming together and sort of clashing.
Yeah.
And, for all that he made a big thing about how this is a superhero comic where the superheroes can never fight, they do eventually fight.
I mean, that is the kind of the interesting tension of it all. I mean, there's a real tension bubbling beneath the surface that runs through the whole thing, which is what's so tense and exciting to read. Yeah, and I guess that tension comes from the fact that, again, these people could either by design or by accident destroy the entire world. I mean, one character who's focused more in the first arc, and we discussed a lot in the previous review, like, which I didn't realise disassociates to reveal their power. And like, I've been reading a non-fiction book about trauma and disassociation recently, and when you disassociate, you also lose control of your behaviour, or something else governs your behaviour, and that's tense, that's scary. Most people when they disassociate, make poor decisions such as having affairs or start fights in pubs. But if you could destroy the world and you disassociate, that's tense.
Yeah, that character, got probably a lot more focus in the first volume than they do in this one. But, I think, if anything, to be honest, a lot of this volume is kind of leaning into the characters who maybe didn't spend as much time with in the first one. I think there's probably somewhat of a complete unit here. Maybe I'm just saying that because I've read them in a line in the last week. But I think the first 11 issues of this do feel like a good, complete sort of unit or season of things sort of building and building and building and building and then coming to this massive head. So, for the record, if you've been vaguely contemplating reading the Power Fantasy, then now would probably be a very good time to read the Power Fantasy. The first 11 issues or 2 collections do read very well together as a single story with a lot of building and building and building and then exploding tension. Yeah,
it feels like a season 1 arc, and this is like the kind of end of season 1, especially as like they've kind of gone through the backstory of the 6 core characters, and the first volume covered 4 of them. Well, everyone got a bit, but this one, you get a lot more Eliza, who's the one character who was really left unexplored by the first volume. And again, quite a bit more about the pyramid, and there wasn't a lot about the pyramid in the first one. Again, focused on some of the other characters, and like again, a lot more about is it Masuki? Is that how it's pronounced? The Japanese woman who disassociates?
I think it might be Masumi.
Masumi is a character who's explored a lot more in the first one, but so this one they're building up the other characters as well, and also through what you mentioned before, this kind of flashback plot line that's kind of the core of the second volume, or the middle bit of the story, to some events that happened in like the late 1980s, which again is seminal in the characters. It fills in kind of what they were doing, quite, efficiently. It's not a kind of big stop the main plot, we're going back in time and like doing something else, and then, it's kind of fed in around the present day plot as well, again, efficiently and maintaining the tension. Sometimes I do really groan when it's like, oh, we're stopping the main plot to go back in time to fill some stuff in. But again, that avoids the obvious pitfalls with that. And I did like the fact that it's kind of based around events that took place during the second summer of love, which is, I guess, something that sort of British music nerds know about, but isn't so widely known about the sort of the apex of like rave culture and acid house, and kind of when ecstasy swept through Britain in like the late 1980s. Yeah, again, from the advent of everything from like the hacienda scene, acid house, Happy Mondays, all that period. And obviously Kieran Gillen's a big music nerd. He's written a lot of comics about music. We've discussed Phonogram on this podcast. I think we've discussed, at least in passing, Wicked and Divine. And there's a lot of sort of subtle ways music's woven into this. Isn't a comic about music, but there's like flashbacks to the 80s, and there's always like nods to 80s like musical culture and things like that. And especially this using the second summer of love for one of the main events, I did really, really like, because like you could have based it around anything from the 80s. I mean, it's British, you could have chosen the miners' strike, you could have chosen something American, but like I know, again, as a music nerd, I did appreciate him weaving in the second summer of love.
Yeah, I do think Kieran Gillen probably enjoyed having this sort of British music culture event being the thing that led to this, no spoilers I guess, but massive borderline apocalyptic catastrophe. It's fun, but again, I should stress, it's not played as arch or dark comedy. It's the Power Fantasy is very straight up melodramatic about the danger it poses.
Yeah, but also you don't need to be aware of the kind of cultural history he's drawing on. I mean, I feel bad because like a lot of the insights that I've dropped in this podcast are kind of creamed from the little essay in the back of each issue, where you find out more about Kieran Gillen's writing process and his thoughts behind it. So yeah, a lot of the deep insights are lifted straight from the man himself. But as someone who really likes his writing and appreciates this writing, finding out how he did it is really good. And also, yeah, the kind of little essays in the end are kind of part of the experience of reading this, at least I feel. But yeah, he mentions in that, like, you don't need to know what like the second summer of love is to get the story. As he said what I said before, which is that like he's trying to tell this story like with all this complexity in it, like kind of as accessibly and as like kind of simply as possible in like, as few issues or as few panels as possible, because it is a big story with a big world, but it's, it's trying to tell the specific story that's engaging. So you don't need to understand some of these things. Like, you don't need to really understand what the pyramid is. It's sort of fed to you. No one knows, because it's something new he's created. You also don't need to understand the kind of musical and cultural references he brings in. It does add something more to the story if you do, but it's not essential. And that's, again, a sign of good writing.
Well, yeah, and again, he doesn't really go in deep in some of the beats of the, like, superhero fights either. Like, you don't need to know in detail exactly what's happening in the confrontation between the superpowers and the Queen, the sort of flashback villain character. A lot of the actual escalating conflict between them takes place off-panel, but the bits he focuses on are the stuff that's actually important to the characters and the sort of developing relationships between them.
Yes, the personal moments, the moments when characters make decisions and change and things like that, which is what you'd focus on if you were, you'd focus on anything, but that's the same as what you'd focus on if you were writing a period drama or a kitchen sink, drama or something like that. The most interesting parts are the moments when characters make decisions, they change, they choose to act in certain ways, and that's what the writing focuses on.
It's a very specific, some might say, I don't know, is brave the word? I don't know, it's a very pertinent choice as a comics writer, because there's got to be some temptation in there to say, well, let's give the artist a chance to draw the heroes fighting the big monster rather than just, pages and pages of chatting. But at the end of the day, yeah, there's a couple of bits and bobs with the big monster, but mostly it is focusing on the characters and stuff, and Caspar Wingard does, of course, nail it. Yeah, he's once again doing amazing work here. I think after a first volume which did contain a lot of chatting, there is a lot more showy stuff here. There's a lot of sort of goth melodrama when we get into the Eliza stuff. There's a bit more superhero showy action. There's some nudity. It's all here. And there's also some very ambitious layouts as well. He's really doing some very big, interesting pages in parts of this.
Yeah, absolutely. The art's beautiful, and I did really, really enjoy it. Especially enjoyed the Eliza section with her like Gothic cathedral thing that she's made. These weird sort of like frozen sculptures inside it, which again, I really described where they came from, or are they actually people? Who knows? It's all very dark and very weird. It's beautifully drawn. Each character has a strong sense of personality. The inside of the pyramid looks kind of like cool in a sort of like obliquely sci-fi way and sort of like mysterious. That's really well done. He's really good at like conveying some of the sort of, I don't know, more abstract parts of the story, like when characters communicate psychically, sending sort of messages, again, long distance messages to each others, or like when they talk but they're not like talking, like they're communicating some other way, like through a something psychic,
telepathy or whatever, yeah.
Or even some kind of like demonic voice or angelic voice that turns up at different points, and like how it's coloured and drawn differently. I mean, I guess we're pushing up against the limits of my ability to describe things that go on in comics, because it's not really my area, and I've certainly not read a lot of comics criticism where this sort of unpacked. But what I felt is I thought it was a very, again, creative way of visual storytelling.
Well, yeah, it's a sort of interplay, because there's a separate letterer. I think Caspar Wingard does the art and the colour, but the letterer is Clayton Cowles, who I think will do a lot of the colours in the lettering and stuff to match what Wingard's doing in the art. So I'm sure they have back and forth about that. But yeah, it does all work beautifully. There is a great sort of synthesis of art and lettering coming together to tell the story. I think Wingard's changing up his layouts a bit for the Hellbound stuff. I think panels become a bit less gritty, which is interesting to show, I don't know, I guess show we're really in a different world now. There's a lot more like diagonal layouts and things. And yeah, it's interesting stuff. It's really well done, and the colours are great as well. Again, I think he changes them up a lot between the different sections to really hit the mood, and it works really well. He's known for his sort of, I think he has done a lot of sort of neon stuff, often sort of pink, purple neon stuff in his time, but there's a lot of variety here to, really help put across the 6 different characters and the different environments and moods they inhabit.
Yeah, it's possibly some of that I missed by reading in panel view rather than page view, I suppose, but that is a very interesting insight. And again, it's like part of the storytelling. I guess like a lot of like great works, or like really like good works from like The Godfather to, I don't know, to things like more recently I've appreciated like Dark and stuff. It's like a range of artists all like doing like kind of their best work. Like there's great writing, there's great art, there's great lettering.
Yeah, I think it's easy to talk about how great the writer is, but again, I think there is a lot of good collaboration here, and I think it's very much a team effort. And yeah, it's a great comic. 2 books in, I'm still all in on the Power Fantasy. I hope to be back for Volume 3.
Yep, same here.
Okay, and that was it. Thank you for listening to Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight. If you have enjoyed this podcast studio experience, why not go to our website at moderatefantasyviolence.com and read our essays, listen to our old episodes, just have a damn good time. And if you enjoy that, then please go to your podcast application of choice and leave us a nice 5-star review. Thank you.
You can also get more from us on social media. You can follow us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can find us on Blue Sky by searching for MFV Podcast. You can also get more from me on social media by searching for Alistair Ball on TikTok, Instagram or Blue Sky. You can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com or my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com. And if you're in London, then please head down to Postbar in Tottenham on the 24th of September, which will probably not long after this podcast drops, when I'll be doing more of this sort of thing in person, where I'll be talking about AI in fiction and are they monsters. So do, if you're in London, pop along for that. And say hi if you listen to the podcast.
Yep, I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on the internet at nickbryan.com on the web, nickbryan.com with a dot on Blue Sky, and nickbryan.com with the word dot on Instagram. Those are the main places. I also have a monthly newsletter which you can subscribe to from the website if you like that sort of thing. And the main thing I talk about in that newsletter is my self-published comics, and the latest one is now kickstarting on, Kickstarter. This is WorryWart, an action fantasy comic about violent teen rebellion in a monster royal family, with exciting, big, lovely, fun cartoon art by the excellent Lane Lloyd and letters by Lettersquids, long-term collaborator on my other series, Sold. And yep, they've both done some fantastic work here. We're trying to get a bit of that good collaboration going, so yeah, come and check it out. It's on Kickstarter for another a solid 3 weeks or so after this podcast goes up, so yeah, go and give us a look. I'll put a link in the show notes and on the website. Thank you. And now, next episode, as you may have noticed if you pay proper attention to all the metadata on these podcast episodes, is our 250th episode. And to mark this mammoth almost 10 years of podcasting, we'll get to 10 years soon, but yeah, well, this is definitely a sign we're getting close. We're going to do what we often do on these special occasions and recommend each other's stuff. So, since I'm talking now, I will begin by recommending my thing for the 250th episode. And the way I went with this is, I have recommended you comics by a lot of the big writers who influenced me over the years, but it did occur to me when thinking about this that the one writer I've liked a lot, who I've never recommended you anything by, is the writer Peter David, who sadly passed away a few months ago. And so I thought this was a good time to mark his sad passing by talking a bit about some of his classic work. And I ruminated a bit on this because a lot of his runs do come in the middle of superhero comic runs and involve a lot of continuity. And it felt like, even though it's a bit of an obvious thing for me to recommend, I'm sorry for my predictability, but the most straightforward thing for us to jump into would be his run on Spider-Man 2099 with art by Vic Leonardi. This was the sort of cyberpunk universe version of Spider-Man set in a possible future Marvel universe. The comic series ran in the sort of mid to late 90s, and the character is, of course, at this point best known for turning up in Across the Spider-Verse. So we're going to cover the first... This bit I haven't sorted out. Maybe the first 6 to 8 issues of Spider-Man 2099, something like that. We'll sort it out. But yeah, we're going to read a chunk of the first few issues of Spider-Man 2099. That is the recommendation.
Oh, excellent. I'm really excited for this. Obviously, I know you're a big Spider-Man fan and it's very important to you. And I'm excited to dive into possibly like a area of Spider-Man I'm not familiar with. And obviously, I love cyberpunk as well. So this does sound like right up my street.
It's interesting. It's sort of 90s cyberpunk. There's a bit of cool net lingo. And Peter David is a great writer. He's not as much of a subversive, deconstructive guy as some of the writers I like. He does do the IP a bit more straight down the line, but he does include a lot of humour and intelligence and fun plotting, so I'm excited to expose you to his work.
Okay, yeah, well, tune in for the next episode to find out what I made of that.
Excellent. Okay, and what have you got for me?
So, last time we did recommendations, which was pretty much a year ago, I think, Nick made the interesting decision to recommend something to me that he got into recently. And a lot of the time we go into things that, kind of shaped us in our formative years, which are, fun to share. I've shared things in the past, including things like A Room for Romeo Brass and things like that. But I'm going to share with Nick in honor of him sharing More Than Meets the Eye with him, I'm going to share something that I got into recently, which is a TV show I discovered during lockdown when I had a lot of time in my hands to dive into some of the more obscure corners of Netflix. But this is an absolute favourite show of mine. I'm looking forward to rewatching it, and we haven't discussed it much on the podcast, so I'm going to recommend you the TV series Alice in Borderland. That's on Netflix.
Okay.
I do love it, and I think you'll find it interesting. I guess we'll discover in 2 weeks' time whether you loved it, hated it, or what you thought. I hope you like it.
Yeah, no, I this was vaguely on the one-day list. I was aware it was a show you really liked, so yeah, no, I'm excited to getting involved. I've heard good buzz about it in general outside conversations with you as well, so yeah, hopefully this will be good.
Yes, so join us in 2 weeks' time for our 250th episode spectacular to coincide with my 40th birthday, just to keep behind the MFV curtain there. So yeah, join us in 2 weeks to find out what we made of these recommendations. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.